Kyle McCord is gone to the NFL, and his replacement likely going to be the Notre Dame transfer quarterback, Steve Angeli. He didn't have much playing time at Notre Dame, so it'll be interesting to see how well he can fit into the Syracuse offense. But he's certainly going to have plenty of opportunities to throw the ball, especially if Syracuse continues their offensive game plan from last season, where they threw around 50 times a game. I do think that Angeli is going to be in a good position to succeed. So Syracuse has some potential for this season, but the rest of the team's not looking as good, and that's a big concern when they play Tennessee in Atlanta. This one probably not going to be particularly close. Tennessee did lose Nico Iamaleava in the transfer portal to UCLA, but they got UCLA's quarterback back in Joey Aguilar, and I do think he's going to be just fine at Tennessee. The rest of the team is still pretty solid. I don't think Tennessee's a playoff team, but I do think that they are better than Syracuse. And in this neutral site game to start the year, I think that the Volunteers will get the win.
And even though it's a neutral site game, it is still in the South, and I think the Tennessee fans will travel a lot better than the Syracuse fans to Atlanta. The following week against UConn is going to be an interesting game because the Huskies are coming off of a 9-win season, very uncharacteristic by their standards for their football team. And they do have their starting quarterback returning after a pretty efficient year. Didn't throw for a ton of yards, but was very efficient, throwing for a good amount of touchdowns while limiting his turnovers. But he is losing a lot of the defense, which is going to be a key factor in some of these games, like against Syracuse. And I think in this one, despite the amount of weapons Syracuse is losing, they still have a lot of young guys with a lot of potential to help Steve Angeli adapt to this style of play. So Syracuse is ultimately going to get the win against UConn. Definitely could be a little bit of a sneakier game than people are anticipating. But the Orange will move to 500, and then Colgate the next week is going to be an easy win, moving them to 2-1 before a road trip to face Clemson.
Yeah, not an easy start to ACC play whatsoever. Going to play one of the best teams in the conference. Dabo Swinney did use the transfer portal this offseason, and he's also returning one of the favorites for the Heisman Trophy in Cade Klubnik at the quarterback position. Clemson is looking very solid for next season. I believe they're going to have a chance to compete for a national title, which is something that has not necessarily been the case the last few seasons. This year, they should be a top five team from start to finish. And I really think that they are just significantly better than Syracuse and are going to win this game. This would be one of the biggest upsets of the season if the Orange were somehow able to win on the road at Clemson.
Yeah, and like Jonah was saying, Clemson is just one of the most complete teams in college football going into next season. Obviously, with the return of Cade Klubnik, but they have TJ Parker and Peter Woods on the defensive line, both top five talents in next year's NFL draft. The secondary is great. The wide receiver room is one of the best in college football. The only real question mark this team has is their running back room after their starters were drafted in the NFL draft. So that's just going to be a little bit of a concern, but given Dabo Sweeney's experience, I'm sure he's going to be able to figure that out pretty quickly, and Clemson will have no problems with Syracuse at home. Syracuse takes on Duke the next week, and Duke is going to be a pretty interesting team next year as well. They've been very consistent getting to that 7, 8, 9 win mark the last few years since Riley Leonard led them to their first really good season in a long time. And now they're bringing in Darian Mensah from Tulane to be the starting quarterback for this team. And he had very solid numbers last year at Tulane. And I think in this Duke offense, he's going to be able to thrive. And against a Syracuse team that is losing a good amount of their starting defense from last year, particularly on the defensive line, I think he will be able to play very, very well, even on the road against the Syracuse team. Maybe Syracuse's secondary can give him some issue because they do have a couple key guys returning there. But overall, I do think Duke is just the better team.
And then it's another very difficult road trip going on the road to a team that was in the college football playoffs last year. Just like Clemson, they're facing SMU this time. Now, SMU won't be quite as good as Clemson this season, But the Mustangs are returning their starting quarterback as well in Kevin Jennings, who is a very talented dual threat quarterback. And I do think SMU is going to be able to maybe not make the college football playoffs this year, but at least be very close. They're one of the favorites in the ACC as well, along with Clemson and that dark horse in Duke. This is going to be another incredibly difficult game for Syracuse. And once again, I would be shocked if they were able to win this one on the road.
It doesn't get easier after their first bye week, taking on Pitt at home. And this is where Syracuse's season kind of came crumbling down in just one game. Granted, they still had a great season last year, but this was a very uncharacteristic loss for them last year. Kyle McCord throwing 4 or 5 interceptions, including 3 pick sixes. This Pitt defense was swarming everywhere against the Syracuse offense, and they're returning a good amount of their defense. Not to mention, Eli Holstein is back as their starting quarterback after a very successful season last year in his freshman year. They also return Desmond Reed at the starting running back position, along with a couple of their wide receivers. So overall, this Pitt team is just looking very solid, and I think compared to Syracuse is just going to be the more complete team, the stronger team, and we'll be able to go back-to-back years beating Syracuse, even if it is a home game for the Orange.
Then another difficult road trip going to face one of the other teams we think is a dark horse in the ACC in the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. Haynes King is returning at the quarterback position. And all around, this is going to be a very solid team. They brought in FIU wide receiver Eric Rivers, and he's going to be a great weapon for Haynes King. In my opinion, he was one of the better wide receivers in the transfer portal, going to be a top wide receiver in college football this season. So that's a scary weapon for Georgia Tech to have. They have the home field advantage as well. We're pretty high on this Georgia Tech team. So it seems really bad for Syracuse that we have them going on a 5 game losing streak here, but their schedule is just so difficult and it really doesn't get any better after this. I don't think Syracuse is necessarily going to be that bad, but I would be shocked if they won any of these games because of how good all of their opponents are going to be this season. And 2-6 seems very bad, but given the teams that they've played, it's honestly not surprising at all.
Yeah, it like Jonah said, it's not a knock on Syracuse. It's just all the teams ahead of them have returning production or just a little bit more proven. Yes, Syracuse was very good last season, but most of the guys that made last year a success are gone. And when you have to bring in a new quarterback that is definitely not accustomed to throwing nearly 600 passes in a season, it's just there are some concerns. The following week, though, against North Carolina, I think is actually a game where they might have a little bit of a chance. Now, North Carolina obviously has Bill Belichick as their head coach. That's the big story this offseason for the Tar Heels. And Bill Belichick was very active in the transfer portal, bringing in Gio Lopez to be the starting quarterback from South Alabama, who in the later half of the transfer portal, when he was one of the only quarterbacks available, was one of the most sought after ones. And I think North Carolina has a chance. There's just a lot of unknown things about this Tar Heels team because it's Bill Belichick's first year and he's going from coaching in the NFL to being in retirement to coaching in college football, along with some off the field distractions. Really, North Carolina could end up winning this game pretty handily because Gio Lopez has starting experience at South Alabama. But this is one where we're actually going to go with Syracuse to get a win in the ACC. Now, this would be an upset win. Like I was saying, North Carolina is probably the overall better team, but I do think Syracuse will be good for a couple upsets along the way, especially in ACC play, because they will be so battle tested to this point in the season. So they'll move to 3-6 here and finally getting that elusive win in ACC play.
And then a road trip to Miami. Carson Beck, the transfer quarterback from Georgia, going to be the Hurricanes starter. And I think he's going to do a decent job. He's no Cam Ward for sure, after Cam Ward was selected #1 overall in the NFL draft. I do think that Carson Beck is going to do a solid job as the quarterback, though. Miami has spent a lot of money in NIL over the past few seasons, and they've built up a pretty solid roster, but I don't yet think it's college football playoff worthy. I do think they're one of the better teams in the ACC, but I'd put them more in the tier alongside, Duke Pitt, Georgia Tech, kind of in that area, which unfortunately for Syracuse is still better than the Orange. And after winning a surprising game against North Carolina, I think that the Orange will fall back into the loss column and to 3-7.
They get a late bye week before another tough road trip, this time going to South Bend to face the runner-up in the college football playoffs last year in the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. And it's a revenge game for Steve Angeli, considering he left the program to take a starting job at Syracuse. And Notre Dame will have its questions, considering that Steve Angeli was one of the quarterbacks in line to be the starter after Riley Leonard went to the NFL. Now it's looking like CJ Carr is the likely starter for the Irish, and he's still going to have one of the better O lines in the country protecting him. The weapons he has are phenomenal in the wide receiver room, as well as having Jeremiah Love, one of the best running backs in college football, returning. And defensively, Notre Dame consistently churns out some of the best defenses we see every year. I really don't see how Syracuse will be able to compete here. I think the weapons that Syracuse have could be good at this point in the season, especially since they're young and will have so much time to develop against great competition. But I don't think it will matter, especially on the road at South Bend. South Bend is one of the tougher places to play in college football. Notre Dame's going to end up getting the win, dropping Syracuse to 3-8.
And then to close out the year, Boston College, year two under Bill O'Brien. And Thomas Castellanos did transfer away, but he got hurt early last season and was replaced by Grayson James, who did a very solid job leading Boston College to a pretty good season, especially considering the injury to Castellanos. I think that they're going to be pretty solid once again this season, but Syracuse going 3-9 after going 9-3 last year seems very, very unlikely. 4-8, I think, is a little bit more realistic, especially given how tough their schedule is. This one really just trying to fit in those records. And I do think that Syracuse has a legitimate shot in this game. They have the home field advantage, and it would be nice to close out the year on a win. It's not likely that Boston College is going to be fighting for anything like a playoff spot. So this game is pretty inconsequential for both programs, which is another reason that I think Syracuse can pull out this win at home. Our way too early projection was 4.8 wins and 7.2 losses. We had Syracuse going 5-7, dropped them one game further to 4-8, and the projection went to 4.85 wins, 2.8 and 5.2 in ACC play. The floor for Syracuse is going to be 2-10. We gave them 2 wins in ACC play, but to be honest, both of those games they could very easily lose. UConn and Colgate are really the only two teams that I think are going to be guaranteed wins for the Orange in this floor scenario. The ceiling going to be 7-5. They can make a bowl game. This is really dependent on Steve Angeli and how well he can adapt to this Syracuse offense and how quickly that will be. It's going to be an uphill battle if Syracuse wants to make a bowl game. I would be absolutely shocked if they were to hit the ceiling of 7-5. So, thank you guys for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in our next video.